but everything was a bit bleak and grey, and the potholes always stand out a bit more when they're full of water, don't they?
Well, as you can see, we're in the same attire. Why? Well, because we're making use of the time and catching up on a bit of just happenings and chit chatting and chatting away and catching up. And as Mark's been away, hello, Mark. How about letting us know how your trip was? Because I believe it was a slight eye opener, considering that you've been kind of not working now for 5 months, having sold the business, and your first time back to the UK since.
Go back to the UK. I try and do it and say to myself, could I live here again? Could I return home and live here? And there's always things we all miss from our home countries. I mean, it's weird things. I miss a winter pub. I do miss the pub culture in the UK. I miss going to see my local football team play when I can see it. The football culture isn't so local here. And friends and family, of course. But going back and visiting and going back to live there are two very different things. And it wasn't my first time back since I sold the business. I popped back to see my mother.
Make sure she's okay.
Make sure she's okay. And that was towards the end of the summer, so it was a different time of year. And I took the family back for the first time for a family gathering in December, which once again wasn't a true reflection. But this weekend I went back on my own to spend some time with my mother and see some of my family. But it does seem a bit unfair comparing the Costa del Sol and 17 degrees and blue skies to wet and damp Oxfordshire and 3 degrees in February. But it was a little bit of an eye-opener, yeah.
With regards to the mood of the people, was it what you were seeing around? Was it the atmosphere in businesses and places, or was it a mixture of all sorts?
It's a strange thing. One thing I always notice, which I want to get this in before I forget, is I'm always shocked about how much staff the places have. Right, so I run a business here. I never had more than 6 people working on one day, right, and that was very rarely happened. But we went to the local town where my mum lives, Tame, which is on the Oxfordshire-Buckinghamshire border, and I had to go to the bank, and we stopped at this little cafe, and she had a wonderful piece of cake. I had a lovely piece of cake and 2 coffees, which was quite about 20 quid. But there was like 6 people working in this place, and it was like a Thursday morning in a little market town, and I'm like, how on earth can they afford this? That was an eye opener compared to Spain. So that would be, I suppose, there's more work in the UK from that point of view, because it's obviously easier to employ people, and the wage systems there are more generous to the employer. Service, I thought, was excellent in the UK, which is something I expect to be worse. But then we talked about the service industry here; it lacks a lot, even though it's getting better. But it was just grey and miserable, and people just seemed very. Apart from people serving you, who it's their jobs to be nice, people just didn't seem as happy. Now, I've noticed that over the last couple of times we've been back in the winter, and of course the winter weather does make a difference. I mean, it never got above 3 degrees, really. I mean, never had much sun. But it did seem a bit, I suppose the word bleak would be the word.
But that tends to describe the UK on a general basis, doesn't it? I mean, okay, fair enough. I'm not joking. That's joking aside. It's not generalising, but the weather in the UK. I think I read recently as well, or saw a video recently that, for example, okay, well, this is being filmed in February. Ireland have just had 10 consecutive days with no sunshine, for example. 10 consecutive days with 0 sunshine. So you can imagine that affects anyone's mood and anyone's kind of the way they're walking around life and looking around and saying, yeah, I want to be outside, but I just can't. I just can't do it.
I remember I went back to see my mum towards the end of the summer, and it was just the same kind of trip from a Wednesday to a Sunday. And she gets up very early. She likes to get up at like 7:30, and the sun's already up then. And I would come downstairs, and we'd sit on her little patio in her back garden, which is a beautiful little garden, landscape garden, and have a cup of coffee. And I love that. And you hear the birds and the big fat pigeons and all that kind of stuff. But we're not doing that in February. I tell you that. It was cold. And when people ask you the things you miss about the UK, one of the days, my favourite type of weather is those days when it's 1 degree, the sky is blue, the sun is shining, you've had a frost overnight, and the frost is starting to melt. I find those days absolutely. That's my favourite type of weather. You can dress really stylish. It makes you feel so alive because of the freshness of it.
Yeah.
But as soon as there's some wind or rain, that narrative changes somewhat. And I didn't have any of those days when I went back this time.
Makes a difference. It makes. I remember the times that I visited the UK. My sister lives down in Bournemouth, South Coast, and I've been down there quite a few times. And you're right. Walking through, for example, in the gardens in Bournemouth, you walk through there after a frost has been there, and it's a bit wet and it's a bit cold. But everyone's got their jackets on, their hats on, but everyone's smiling. Sun's out. It's a clear day. You can definitely see the change in atmosphere and change in mood compared to that little drizzle that's out there, or the foggy days or the dark days, and everyone's just trying to get into somewhere, a coffee shop or get in the pub or whatever, just to get out the cold and just enjoy themselves and get away from it.
I think what we should say here is that we're very lucky that we live on the Costa del Sol, which we've said on various videos is probably has the best weather in Europe, apart from the Canary Islands, maybe. So it does seem very unfair comparing the UK to the south of Spain, because the north of Spain does have some pretty hard weather. We're talking to a friend in Galicia, and he calls it British weather up there. But it does have especially down here, I feel so much happier with the way my day-to-day life is, just from the fact that the sun is shining. I never realised how much until I came back. And I think I would struggle. I can't believe I'm going to say this. I think I'd actually struggle to live in the UK now.
Really?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people still feel the same way, but then all of a sudden people surprise you, and they for whatever reason they decide to go back, and then they go, "Wow, it's the best decision we've made for ages." And I guess that part to play that they're taking away the weather side. They're getting closer to friends and family, people that they've missed for so long, or that closeness that we've talked about different. They're going around a mate's house or doing this and doing that, which you don't have here as much. I think maybe that's part and parcel of the change that they've missed, and they go back and they go, right, I've got it back again, kind of thing. That's where they say it's the best thing.
You're always going to be separated from family. So my brother, my sister, and my mother, and all live quite close to each other, so they can get together on a regular basis. Where it's a bit more difficult for me to do that with my kids. So we do. I wouldn't say we feel apart with the day with technology and things like that. You're like that, but I can see a lot of people craving that. I mean, we talked about the family setup here and how they all get together. And I think that's a lot like that a lot all over the world, and you can miss that. So I can see why people would go back. One thing I did observe from going everywhere at the airport or everything like that. An airport's not a very fair example, but there's so much junk food everywhere. It's like when you're queuing up in even a petrol station. It's like, buy one of these, get one free. Get this, get one free. Duo pack, half price. And I was in a BP. Or one of those service stations on the way from the airport to my mum's house, and I thought, I'll get myself like something vegetarian, and it was all sausage rolls. This everything was real unhealthy stuff. I was quite shocked at how much that's changed. And you do notice, and this sounds awful, but it's a bit of a problem here, to be fair as well. People are a lot fatter than they used to be.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's to do with the diet.
Do you think that lockdown has had a lot to do with that as well?
I think COVID, yes, it could have affected, but it just seems everything is just marketed towards making you feel good. I mean, comfort food is a great thing. There's nothing better than having a couple of bars of chocolate to make you feel better. But it doesn't do much for your waistline.
No, I know. I mean, the UK's never really had, shall we say, never really had a reputation of having the healthiest of food that come from different countries, the States, the Nordic countries, Spain or Mediterranean. They'll turn and go, what have the English got really? What was it? Pie and chips and fish and chips and stuff like that. Even though there's more culture in the UK now and has been for many years that more people get to see, so the Indian cuisine, Italian, it is there as well. But as traditional English dishes, what is there?
Well,
do you know what I mean? Compared to the likes of Spain and Italy and Greece, which are much more Mediterranean and much more healthy styles of food. That's what I'm referring to.
I mean, the English traditional food is very meat and potatoes orientated, as it is a lot of Northern Europe because of the climate. It's that to make you feel warm. We were talking about various Spanish dishes, which are the people eat here in the winter, which are the same kind of equivalent. But I'm always shocked when I go to restaurants in the UK. And when we went back at Christmas, we took my mother out for lunch on a Sunday with my two kids and my wife. My wife's Chilean. And they'd never had a Sunday roast before, right? I don't particularly like a Sunday roast, never have like a Sunday roast. But I said, you've got to try a Sunday roast. You never had it before. And they couldn't believe how good it was, right? And it was served really well, done very well. And I think British food gets a bit of a hard rap from that point because I worked in the restaurant industry in London, and some of the things you saw there were groundbreaking. Once again, it's London. I do realise that. But when I go back, things are done pretty well. But my mother at Edinburgh Street has a fish and chip shop run by, I think, a Polish family. And the only time I ever eat fish and chips is when I go home. And I say, come on, Mum, let's get fish and chips. Right, so I said, she dropped me off at the chip shop and I walked home with the fish and chips. I got one big cod, one small cod, and a large chips, and a can of Coke, and it cost 24 quid. I couldn't believe it. It's like, bloody hell. Right, I mean, it was delicious. Delicious. Yeah. And I love when the Spanish go, oh, fish and chips, the English see fish and chips. I mean, you could be very critical and say, well, the Spanish have fried fish and patatas bravas, you know. It's not a million miles away from fish and chips. Both are delicious.
You say about the price in the UK, I mean, like 25 quid, but if you think about it, when you look at some of the beach bars and you go for any halibut hake, you're going for boquerones and things like that, you're still looking at 9-10 euros a ration or a portion. So price-wise, really, are we really that different to the UK?
I don't think price-wise. When we went to that pub meal, I took everybody out, and it cost me, I think, 150 quid for the five of us to have a meal. And we all had desserts with a mixture of starters and main courses. We didn't drink very much because we're all kids and non-drinkers, really. My wife had a glass of wine. My mum had a beer, I think. So that wasn't far off what you'd pay here at a same kind of standard restaurant. I mean, it's a beautiful gastropub with a windmill outside it looking over the countryside. I mean, you'd be paying the same kind of price here, I'd imagine, something similar. Well, I was surprised with the price of the shops and things like that. There are more deals to be had in supermarkets. And I didn't go to the best supermarket to compare prices with because we were stuck in Greenbelt, Waitrose. But things were take alcohol out of the equation because that's taxed differently. But things like packets of ham were more expensive, packets of cheese. A tub of ice cream didn't seem that much more expensive than Spain, to be fair. Everything seemed to be 30-40% more expensive than here, if not double, and with certain products. And I think people don't seem to bat an eyelid at paying £4 for a coffee. Where I was like, that's almost €6, €5. That's like €5 for a coffee.
Anyway, get away from that side of things. What about you? Because you didn't just go and see Mum. You actually had a bit of an eventful Saturday, didn't you?
Well, I went to. I'm an Oxford United fan, and I love my home team, and I try and support them where I can. So when I go home, I tend to coincide it with going to the club. I was quite shocked at the price of the club shop, which has always been reasonably reasonable, but a baseball cap was coming in at 25 quid now, which quite shocked me. But I thought, I'm sure about 15 before. The price of the ticket was quite reasonable. We paid £28 for a ticket for a second division game. But we were sat. It was cold. I mean, Oxford Stadium's not the nicest stadium in the world. We can get a new one, hopefully. But even though that, I love my football, I love that it wasn't the most pleasant experience sitting in 3 degrees in the drizzle, watching that. Once again, I had the flu, so it wasn't really the ideal experience. Yeah. Do I miss that? I do and I don't. Now I do and I don't. But that was my trip to the UK. I do feel a bit guilty comparing the Costa del Sol in February to the UK in February because it's not really a fair comparison. And I do enjoy going back in the summer when but everything was a bit bleak and grey, and the potholes always stand out a bit more when they're full of water, don't they? and driving down the country lanes, and they're not full of trees and greenery and birds flying around. They're just all kind of like just branch. I don't know. It was interesting for the first time, and a lot of people who I know who are watching this won't believe I'm saying this. I'm not sure if I could move back again.
Really?
Yeah. There we are.
I did contemplate it a few years ago. I'm not so enamored by the idea now for the time being. I've been here a long time, and it would be a huge. I like going back there. I like visiting every now and again. I do get a sense of nostalgia when I'm there for more than, say, 2 or 3 days. I think, could I do it? Couldn't I do it? And then I come back here, and then all of a sudden it's gone. I don't want to do that now. I'm all right, thanks.
But see, that's one thing that I might put this in the end or not. I might chop it off. The job prospects. There's a lot more jobs in the UK, and I always said to you, Dan, if you're in the UK, you would have you could have your pick of jobs, and you'll be rising through the ranks of many a company because you're that type of person. Well, unfortunately, here in our age bracket, it's very difficult to get any sort of decent work. Whereas in UK, you do notice when you go to shops or warehouses and things like that, they like to employ people who are over 50. You know, they're considered a good workforce. Whereas here, we're kind of like, nah, they go for a younger person. So wages and things like that are higher in the UK. As for tax breaks and things like that, I wouldn't know. But I did see a good variety of different age groups working.
Cool.
Right.
If you would like to engage, comment, even share, we encourage you to share because that means that you're caring about your friends and family and you know that they're going to like this or possibly like this. Please do. Below, you've got the share button and you've also got the subscribe. Subscribing costs you absolutely nothing. We're not going to ask for anything, just that you follow us. And by subscribing, you get a little notification when we post a new video. And that way you're always kept up to date with what we're doing, what we're talking about. If you want to comment, you're more than welcome as well, because we do like engaging with our followers, shall we call them. So please do. You've got the comment section down below. And if there's something that you want to talk about or it wasn't covered in today, you'd like us to cover it in another video, please just let us know.
Yep, I concur completely. Right, I need to go as soon as possible because I need to have a coughing fit, I think.